Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Let's start with the bad one first. There was a surge in news that the world's first pregnancy robot is being developed in China. This will be a humanoid surrogate robot for pregnancy. It will be able to carry a fetus in an artificial womb in its abdomen until 10 months and then give birth, which means it will replicate the entire process from conception to delivery. The fetus will grow inside the artificial womb filled with artificial amniotic fluid and will receive nutrients through a hose. This is a project by Dr. Zhang Quifeng, a PhD at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. According to Dr. Zhang, the artificial womb technology is already in mature stage and now it needs to be implanted in the robot's abdomen so that a real person and the robot can interact to achieve pregnancy, allowing the fetus to grow inside. In 2017, some scientists in Philadelphia in the US were able to grow a premature lamb in an artificial womb known as a biobag. This biobag was made of transparent vinyl material and was filled with warm water and salt to create artificial amniotic fluid. Nutrients were supplied to the lamb fetus through an umbilical cord. 4 weeks later, the lamb fetus grew wool. This period of 4 weeks is equivalent to 23 weeks of pregnancy in humans. Now, for a humanoid robot, it needs to do more than just to be an artificial womb. To start with, fertilization of egg by sperm has to happen. Whether this will be through some kind of IVF equivalent technology is not known yet. A prototype is expected to be released by next year for about 14,000 US dollars. The main intention behind doing this seems to be to help infertile people and couples. Dr. Zhang said, "I initiated development to solve the population decline issue," adding that while commercial surrogacy is designated as illegal, I want to meet the demands of those who do not wish to marry but want to have children. You can go through the technical details of how the robot will work with biology of a human fetus, etc. But I think there are large gaps in the ethics of this which are not explored yet. There are of course questions like regulation and who gets access and what the impacts on children born through this procedure are and so on. But I try to imagine a few scenarios keeping antinatalism in mind. Even though it will be used to help only those who can't have children the natural way, if this technology becomes successful, then there would be far-reaching consequences. For example, the opportunity cost of going through natural pregnancy and maternity leave and so on will increase tremendously. There would be many women who would rather have the robot become pregnant while they continue their careers uninterrupted. So the child-free women who are child-free for those reasons might rethink their decisions. In a way, it will liberate women from the compulsions of pregnancy for having biological children. This is assuming that there is no regulation on who could use this technology. And even where there is regulation, it might fade away gradually once people see the benefits. This is a dream come true for pronatalists. Billionaires like Elon Musk could easily create legions of babies by literally farming humans. People like Simone Collins won't have to risk exploding their uterus.
And we're going to have more than 7 if we can. Basically, until my uterus is forcibly removed in a botched surgery, I'm going to keep going.
If this happens, then the question of how those children would be raised and by whom is a whole different serious problem to be solved. The point is, this is bad news for antinatalism. We are already trying to go to Mars. We are trying to de-extinct extinct species. We are trying to increase fertility rates. And now this tool which can create human farms. But, and at the risk of sounding like an optimist, I see some positives for antinatalism because of this. It is argued by pronatalists that having children is an instinct. There are two parts to this. One is the part of a need to raise children, to take care of some other being. And the second part is about the need to go through the process of having children, the process of pregnancy, the biological clock for women. This second part will be diminished. The opportunity cost of getting pregnant is huge compared to using robotic surrogate. The fact that you can even do this sort of calculation undermines the instinct argument. Another one is the appeal to nature. This comes in many forms, like the basic one being reproduction is a natural consequence of sex, or a more subtle form where having children in general is seen as a natural activity, just like other animals do. And so not having children is somehow seen as unnatural and hence bad. Well, we now have a completely unnatural way to have children on top of existing artificial assistance procedures for reproduction. Next is a pro-choice argument for abortion. It's not the mother's body anymore. This hopefully shifts focus on the child, and you can either be anti-abortion or pro-abortion. The messy process of pregnancy will be removed. All the emotional attachment that comes along with it will be reduced, if not eliminated. As a result, we might be able to see clearly what it means to create a whole new person. Our evolutionary biases will not play as strong a role in looking at reproduction. As a result, people might even be turned off from having children altogether. If this sounds far-fetched, then I have a couple of analogies to make. The advent of factory farming of animals has undoubtedly caused enormous harm to animals, but it is also the reason why so many people are turned off from the practice of consuming animals. Some of them still insist on humane killing practices and so on, but many others go beyond that. It is their knowledge of factory farms that triggers them to give up on animal consumption altogether. Now, I don't have any statistical evidence at hand to show this, but that's the impression that I get. A more real analogy would be about dog and cat breeders. I have personally met many people who had nothing to do with the welfare of pets, but the process of seeing how dog breeders breed dogs for commercial ends changed their perspective towards dogs. Learning about the cruelty in breeding industry enabled them to see that dogs were not merely some pets, but individuals with personalities and needs. Their opposition didn't stop at breeders though. They started to help catch stray dogs and get them sterilized. A good chunk of dog-loving community won't mind if dogs actually go extinct. As Gary Francione has said, if there were 2 dogs left in the universe and it were up to us as to whether they were allowed to breed so that we could continue to live with dogs, and even if we could guarantee that all dogs would have homes as loving as the ones that we provide, we would not hesitate for a second to bring the whole institution of pet ownership to an end. I have seen dog lovers who had previously bought dogs as pets from breeders agree with this code. So my dream of something similar happening about human procreation as a result of separating biological pregnancy from the act of having children, at least to some people, has some precedents in the past. 2 antinatalist meetups are coming up for those in the UK. The first one is on 31st of August at the Vegan Campout and is organized by Lawrence Anton. It will be in Baldock, which is somewhere near Cambridge. Another antinatalist meetup will be in Edinburgh, and it will be either in September or October. The exact date is yet to be decided. You can follow this link on the Effective Altruism forum for further information, as well as this Facebook post for the Vegan Campout meetup. A new version of the Antinatalism Handbook website is now live. It contains all new updated objections, a video series, and an updated look to the website. New translations are also expected soon. So yet another milestone for Lawrence and a valuable resource for the rest of us. Revista Henadas is a Spanish philosophical magazine. They have an advertisement to call for papers for their 5th issue, which will be themed on the theories of annihilation. You can send your articles, translations, or reviews until 1st of September 2025 to revistahenadas@gmail.com. Now, the topic is not necessarily antinatalism. It is about annihilation of the world. But the broad scope includes philosophical pessimism as well as antinatalism. Antinatalism, David Benatar's Asymmetry argument for why it's wrong to have children, is an article by Jack Maden on his philosophybreak.com. This may sound like just another personal blog, but there are 2 notable points. His site says that he has more than 21,000 subscribers to his newsletter, so it is nice to see antinatalism getting a voice to such a large audience. Secondly, the article is written nicely. It introduces us to antinatalism with Benatar's asymmetry as its focal point, and then also provides some counter-arguments to both antinatalism and pessimism in general. This article is good for anyone who would like a very high-level overview of the kind of thinking that goes on in the antinatalist world. Honi Soit is a weekly student newspaper of the University of Sydney in Australia. In it was a very poorly written short article on environmental antinatalism against antinatalism in the Anthropocene. Environmental antinatalism is the idea that by having a child, we are creating another consumer who will have its own carbon footprint, and at the same time, we are pushing an innocent child into a world which is already at risk of climate change. Honi Soit spins this to make it sound like a racist idea. In the past, eugenics was used as a means to curb reproduction of people of color. Now, with climate change, says Honi Soit, it is again the white supremacists who don't want other people reproducing, and therefore climate-induced antinatalism is racist. This is unfortunate both because of its poor argumentation and because it is in a student newspaper. Not every idea needs to be seen through this anti-racist angle. This is a classic example of why being woke has become such a hated word. Lawrence did an interview with Katherine Dee. She studies internet subcultures and has written quite a bit about antinatalism on her default.blog. This interview discusses antinatalism as one of the foundational internet subcultures among many others. They talk more about antinatalists and their social aspects rather than philosophical arguments for or against antinatalism. So if you are looking for something which is not too dark or heavy, but more about the community, then this is a super cool video to watch. They also talk about the global makeup of antinatalists and the political affiliations of antinatalism. Interestingly, Katherine herself is not an antinatalist. I mean, at least not as strong as some of us here. She was even a pro-natalist once upon a time, but she studies antinatalism as an outsider and has done some wonderful work, including texture interviews of Amanda Suknik, Inmendam, and David Benatar. It's nice to see antinatalism from an outsider's perspective, and so this interview is very valuable. Now, there was also a response video to this by a channel called Antinatalist Variety Hour. It was an AI scripted and voiceover video with cringe amounts of figures of speech and misplaced criticism. I had to cover this for completeness, but you would be better off not watching this one. Speaking of Lawrence, he has also done an interview with Marcus Teo. Marcus is a PhD candidate at the Center for Biomedical Ethics at the National University of Singapore. Unlike Katherine Dee's interview, which was focused more on the social aspects of antinatalists, this one is jam-packed with philosophy. Marcus defends his view of moderate antinatalism. He agrees that coming into existence is always a harm, that is a universal fact, but that does not automatically translate into all cases of procreation being morally wrong. He defines a different criteria for lives that are worth starting instead of someone like David Benatar, who would say that no lives are worth starting. On Marcus's view, lives that are worth starting need to satisfy two conditions. One, the child, after coming into existence, should think that their life is worth continuing. And two, before having that child, its prospective parents must be convinced that their child would think that its life would be worth continuing. In the real world, according to Marcus, there are only a small number of lives among those that are being created that meet these conditions and so worth starting. Other lives should not be started, and hence the moderate antinatalism. Now, I have not read the actual thesis that Marcus is working on to develop this view, so I might have got it completely wrong. And also, I have so many questions on this formulation, but maybe once his work is published, we may know better. The interview also covered Marcus's risk-based arguments as well as his asymmetry, that there are more reasons to not have children than there are to have them. Marcus has already written quite a few papers on antinatalism and its benefits. Konrad Schochik has critiqued some of them, and they talked about it in the interview. Overall, a very interesting, content-packed and densely valuable interview. So thanks to both Marcus and Lawrence for doing this. Revista Henedas is a Spanish channel, and they made a video review of Schopenhauer's biography by Luis Fernando Moreno Claros. The review is originally in Spanish, but I auto-dubbed it into English and found it very informative. Some of the things things you may already know are that Schopenhauer had two daughters who died early and how he hated his mother and Hegel for very different reasons. But there are other aspects about his struggle in life. I mean, when he was alive, he was not recognized as much as he was after his death. And he was not very polite either. So there are some spicy takes in that biography. From Spanish to Hindi, the word yoni could mean vagina in literal terms in Hindi or Sanskrit, but it could also mean womb, uterus, or genitals. Figuratively, it is also used for origin, place of birth, source of birth, and many other things. There is a myth in Hindu belief that we keep on going through the cycle of death and rebirth until we attain liberation called moksha. When we die, our soul changes body like we change clothes. But we may not be reborn as a human again. In fact, humans are so superior that you have to pass through 8.4 million yonis of different species to be born as a human. Human yoni is a privilege, and therefore we should be thankful to pass through it and make the most of it to achieve liberation from this trap. This is of course all myth, which Sakshi Antinatalist attacks in her latest video. In rejecting this myth on scientific grounds, she makes a case for antinatalism instead. So worth a watch if you know Hindi or can get an auto-dubbed version. I want to point out a rather obscure religious article, The Nations and Natalism. It talks about two different ways of expanding the influence of church and spreading Christianity. It starts by saying there's a long-running joke in evangelical circles that Baptists do all their church growth through missions and evangelism, while Presbyterians do all theirs through having children. So one way to spread the religion is through missions and evangelism so as to let existing people know about it. That's through memes, spreading the ideas, reproduction of religion through memetics. Another way is to create new people and bring them up in these religions, reproduction of religion through genetics. But the article argues that these two methods don't actually have to be mutually exclusive. You should do both at the same time. Disciple making begins at the dinner table, meaning start with your own family, have children, and then program them with religion. Then it quotes from the Bible. The little disciples at our tables become the arrows we thrust out into the world, piercing into the darkness with the gospel. And when they do go out into the world, teaching others to obey all that Christ commanded us, their labors will necessarily translate to more disciples engaged in glorious good works, not only of evangelism, but also of life's ordinary duties in the home and workplace. So you have children, teach them religion, and then they will go out into the world, evangelize other people, as well as have children of their own who would in turn go out on missions, and the cycle continues. Do you see how memetics and genetics are so deeply interwoven to drive what is clearly a pyramid scheme? And this is not just about Christianity, it happens in every major religion. I would argue even secular people justify having children to propagate their own memes like veganism or culture or going to Mars or whatever memetic fantasy they hold. You might be surprised that I said veganism as a memetic fantasy, but that's true. I have heard vegans who think that having a child and raising it vegan will contribute to the case of veganism. And there is some truth in that, but the risks outweigh the benefits. But the good news is not all vegans think this way. VegOut magazine, for example, is one of the major vegan magazines with over 15,000 subscribers. They have an article, The Harsh Truth About Why Millennials and Gen Z Are Choosing a Child-Free Life. Although it does not go into antinatalism and stays more into child-free domain, it is always good to see a vegan publishing house recognizing non-reproduction in some form. And that's all we have for this week's antinatalism. See you next time.